The slap was so loud that the jazz quartet stopped in the middle of a song. My face snapped to the side. A glass of Cabernet tipped from my hand and poured across the white linen table at the Houston Petroleum Club. More than 280 executives, donors, politicians, and old Texas families watched the red stain spread between the crystal glasses. The woman who had hit me smiled as if the room had just announced her name for an award. She wore a silver designer gown, a diamond necklace, and the kind of confidence that usually belongs to someone who knows security has been told not to remove her. Her hand was still raised. Behind her stood my husband, Grant Caldwell, president of Caldwell Infrastructure Group and the man I had been married to for 5 years. He did not come to me. He did not ask whether I was hurt. He stepped behind the younger woman and smoothed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her cheek. "Maybe now she'll understand that a man is allowed to leave a marriage," the woman said. "She has been occupying a place that belongs to me." I touched my cheek. My skin burned beneath my fingers. "Who are you?" She hooked both hands around Grant's arm. "Paige Monroe. And I'm carrying his child." The room seemed to tilt. I waited for Grant to deny it. He looked annoyed, but not at her. "Elena, don't make a scene," he said. "Paige is pregnant. She's emotional." I stared at him. "She just slapped me." "And you're fine." The quartet remained silent. A server stood frozen with a tray against his chest. Near the stage, Grant's mother, Margaret Caldwell, lowered her eyes but did not move. 5 years earlier, I had believed I was marrying into a formidable family. What I learned was that the family's strength had belonged mostly to Grant's father, Arthur. During Arthur's final illness, I renegotiated the credit line that kept 2 manufacturing plants open, persuaded key suppliers not to abandon us, and repaired a bond proposal Grant had nearly destroyed by hiding cost overruns. When Arthur died, Caldwell Infrastructure was stable again. He had left me something Grant never considered important enough to understand. Through an irrevocable gift completed before his death, Arthur transferred 51% of the voting shares in the Caldwell Holding Company directly to me as my separate property. The transfer had been reviewed by independent counsel, recorded on the corporate ledger, and structured without restrictions that prevented a sale to a qualified buyer. Grant knew I held the shares. He simply treated them as if they belonged to the marriage, the family, or eventually to him. Arthur knew his son better. On his last lucid afternoon, he had closed his hand around mine. "If Grant ever mistakes the Caldwell name for permission to destroy what other people built," he said, "protect what still deserves to survive." For years, I believed he was talking only about the company. Standing beneath the chandeliers with Paige's handprint burning across my cheek, I understood that Arthur had also been talking about me. I turned to Grant. "I'm going to ask once. Are you allowing this woman to humiliate me in front of everyone here, and do you still expect me to remain your wife?" Paige laughed softly. "Wife? You should be looking for an apartment." Grant put an arm around her shoulders. "If you disrespect Paige again, I'll file for divorce tomorrow." Whispers moved from table to table. Grant's chief financial officer looked down at his plate. A city council member who had known me for years covered her mouth. Something broke inside me, but it was not my heart. It was the last piece of patience I had mistaken for loyalty. "Perfect," I said. Grant frowned. "What?" "I accept." Paige's smile widened. "Finally," she said. "You understand." I looked directly at her. "Just one question. Are you completely sure that baby is Grant's?" Her smile flickered. "Of course it is." "Then I hope he becomes as certain as you sound." Grant stepped toward me. "Enough, Elena." I opened my evening bag and took out my phone. That morning, Paige had sent me a message from an unfamiliar number. "Tonight Grant is going to remove you from his life in front of everyone. Have some dignity and disappear quietly." I had not answered. I had called my attorney, Marcus Lee, and asked him to activate the contingency Arthur had prepared years earlier. Marcus verified that my voting shares remained unrestricted, requested confirmation of a standing acquisition offer, and prepared the transaction for my final authorization. Now I called him and put the phone on speaker. "Marcus," I said, "execute the sale of my 51% interest." Grant went still. "What did you say?" I kept my eyes on him. "I'm accepting the binding offer we reviewed this afternoon." Marcus's voice came through clearly. "Elena, I confirm that the buyer has deposited the agreed purchase price into escrow. The definitive transfer will close tomorrow after the final compliance certificate. Do you authorize us to release your signed consent?" Grant's anger vanished so quickly it looked like the lights had changed over his face. "You can't do that. They are my shares. They're Caldwell shares. That isn't a legal category." For the first time, Paige no longer looked triumphant. Grant glanced at the surrounding tables. "Let's go home. We'll talk privately. Don't make a permanent decision because you're angry. When she hit me, you asked me to be quiet. When she announced she was pregnant, you asked me not to embarrass her. When you threatened divorce, you weren't worried about permanent decisions." Marcus spoke again. "I need your final confirmation." Grant grabbed my wrist. "Elena, don't. Without that voting block, I lose control of the board." I looked down at his hand until he released me. "You should have remembered that before deciding which woman was replaceable." I lifted the phone. "I authorize the sale." The room became utterly silent. Seconds later, an escrow confirmation arrived in my email. Grant saw the subject line. His face changed again. Arrogance had left. Fear remained. Then Marcus said something neither of us expected. "The buyer requests a meeting tomorrow morning. There is also a sealed letter Arthur Caldwell left in my custody. It could be opened only if Elena ever sold the shares." Grant's head came up sharply. So did mine. Arthur had never mentioned a letter. But from the way Grant whispered, "Who is the buyer?" I knew he had already guessed. I did not answer him at the gala. I walked past Margaret, who finally reached for my arm. "Elena, please," she said. "Whatever Grant has done, don't dismantle Arthur's life's work in public." I looked at the woman who had watched Paige strike me. "I didn't bring this into public, Margaret. A wife sometimes has to absorb humiliation to protect a family. Then tonight your son can start absorbing his own." I left through the ballroom doors while 280 people watched Grant understand that I had not merely accepted his divorce. I had removed the thing he believed made him untouchable. My cheek still ached when I reached the hotel across downtown. I filled a small towel with ice and sat beside the window looking at the lights around Buffalo Bayou. Grant called 84 times before midnight. Paige called twice. Margaret sent 11 messages that alternated between pleading and accusation. Marcus called once. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Are you sure about the sale?" "More sure than I was when I authorized it." "Good. Then get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult." Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grant touching Paige's hair while my wine spread across the table. I also remembered the first time Arthur Caldwell asked me to save his company. Grant and I had been married for 9 months. Caldwell Infrastructure had grown from a regional steel fabrication business into a network of engineering, industrial maintenance, and construction companies. Grant had inherited the title of president while Arthur remained board chair. Grant loved acquisitions, headlines, and groundbreaking ceremonies. He hated debt covenants, vendor disputes, and any meeting where charisma could not substitute for an answer. He had purchased a struggling fabrication plant outside Beaumont without disclosing the full environmental remediation cost. A lender discovered the omission and threatened to freeze the group's revolving credit facility. Payroll for almost 3,000 employees was at risk. I was 38 then and working as a restructuring advisor. I had never planned to join the Caldwell business. Arthur came to our house carrying 2 banker boxes and asked if I would review the files as an independent consultant. Grant says the bank is overreacting, I told him. Arthur's mouth tightened. That is what Grant says when numbers refuse to admire him. For 4 days, I barely slept. I found unencumbered equipment, negotiated a temporary borrowing base, and built a remediation schedule that the lender accepted. Then I flew to Dallas and persuaded 3 major suppliers to extend terms instead of stopping shipments. Grant presented the recovery plan to the board. He thanked the finance team, outside counsel, and his own decisive leadership. He did not mention me. At home that night, he kissed my forehead. You know how these old directors are, he said. It would complicate things if they thought my wife had rescued me. The company was rescued. Isn't that what matters? Exactly. I accepted the answer because I loved him and because Arthur knew the truth. Over the next 4 years, the pattern repeated. Grant overpromised. I repaired. Grant announced. I remained behind the curtain. I restructured a pipeline services loan, prevented a union dispute from shutting down a maintenance subsidiary, and salvaged a public project after Grant committed to a deadline no engineering team could meet. During Arthur's cancer treatment, I became the person suppliers, lenders, and department heads called when they needed a decision to survive the next morning. Grant called it support. Arthur called it leadership. 6 months before he died, he transferred the controlling shares to me. He hired separate lawyers for both of US and required a physician to confirm his capacity. The gift letter stated that the shares were mine individually, not payment for caregiving and not property held for Grant. When Grant learned, he was furious for 2 days. Then Arthur reminded him that Grant would remain president as long as performance and the board justified it. Elena doesn't want to run the company, Grant told himself. At the time, he was right. I wanted the business protected, the employees paid, and my marriage intact. I had no interest in humiliating my husband by displaying how often I had rescued him. Margaret encouraged that silence. Men like Grant need to feel that the wheel is in their hands, she once told me. You can guide him without making him see the guidance. That sounds exhausting. Marriage is not a competition. She said it only when I was winning something Grant wanted to claim. After Arthur's death, Grant's behavior hardened. He began using company aircraft for weekend trips he called supplier visits. He approved consulting contracts for people no division had recognized. He hired Paige as a brand and government relations advisor after meeting her at a charity auction. Paige was 31, clever, polished, and skilled at turning proximity into status. Within 5 months, she was attending lender dinners. Within 8, she had an office near Grant's. Within 10, Margaret was inviting her to family luncheons while telling me Paige was just useful socially. I suspected the affair before I had proof. Grant changed his phone code. He began criticizing my clothes before public events and excluding me from company travel. He spoke about Paige's energy and my lack of gratitude. When I asked why her cousin's marketing firm had received a contract without competitive bids, he accused me of jealousy. The gala message removed the last doubt. It also gave me time. I did not know Paige planned to hit me or announce a pregnancy. I knew Grant intended to shame me publicly and pressure me into a divorce before I could reconsider the voting shares. The standing offer for my interest had existed for 2 years as part of Arthur's emergency plan. I had refused even to ask the buyer's name until the morning of the gala. Marcus would reveal only that the buyer had passed every qualification Arthur required and was willing to preserve operations, contracts, and jobs. If you authorize, Marcus said, you are not selling to burn the company. You are selling control to someone Arthur trusted. That was enough. At 10 the next morning, I entered Marcus's law office in a cream pantsuit, with makeup covering the worst of the handprint. On the conference table lay the final purchase agreement and a yellowed envelope bearing Arthur's signature. Marcus stood when I arrived. The buyer is waiting. The door opened. Adrian Sterling walked in. He was 48, tall, quiet, and known throughout Texas for making acquisitions no one saw coming. Sterling Industrial Holdings was Caldwell's fiercest competitor. Grant had spent years trying to beat Adrian for refinery maintenance contracts, manufacturing sites, and public infrastructure bids. At home, he described Adrian as cold, arrogant, and incapable of loyalty. Adrian looked at the fading mark on my cheek before meeting my eyes. "Ms. Marquez Caldwell," he said. "Please use Elena Marquez. The rest is temporary." The corner of his mouth moved. "That sounds like a well-considered decision." I remained standing. Why would Arthur arrange for his largest competitor to buy control of his company? Adrian placed the sealed letter between us. "Because 12 years ago, Arthur saved my father's company when a false safety accusation nearly destroyed us. He gave us evidence that cleared the Sterling name, then refused repayment." Marcus verified the seal and handed me a letter opener. Arthur's handwriting leaned forward across the page. "Adrian. If this letter is open, Grant has once again mistaken being my son for the right to step on whoever is holding up the roof. If Elena has chosen to leave, do not stop her. Pay her fairly. Protect the employees. Do not preserve Grant's authority merely because it bears my last name. The company deserves discipline, and Elena deserves an exit that belongs to her." The final line was addressed to me. "Elena, if you are reading this, you waited longer than I hoped. Do not confuse saving the business with saving my son from himself." I set the letter down because my hands had begun to shake. "He knew," I said. Adrian nodded. "Arthur knew many things he wished were not true." "Are you buying this company to dismantle it?" "No. I am buying voting control to protect approximately 3,200 jobs and to stop Grant from committing the group to obligations the balance sheet cannot carry." He opened a binder. Sterling's analysts had studied Caldwell's subsidiaries for 3 years. Profitable turnarounds were linked to plans, lender negotiations, and operating memos I had written. Losses clustered around Grant's unaudited acquisitions and personal initiatives. "You investigated me," I said. "I investigated the asset I was asked to buy." That sounds less flattering. It is meant to be more respectful. For the first time since the gala, I nearly smiled. The closing took 4 hours. My counsel confirmed the price, tax provisions, representations, and escrow. Sterling accepted the existing labor agreements and operating debt but reserved claims related to undisclosed liabilities. I signed the transfer. The escrow agent released the payment. At 2:17 p.m., I stopped being Caldwell Infrastructure's controlling shareholder. Adrian extended his hand. "You are free." "Not yet." "Divorce?" "And the consequences of whatever Grant hid from both of us." Adrian studied me. "Then I have another proposal." I felt my shoulders tighten. "A professional one," he added. "Sterling has a strategic operations division that has needed leadership for 2 years. I want you to run it." "Because Arthur asked you to take care of me?" "Arthur asked me not to trap you. Offering work is not a trap. You may refuse." "Why me?" He turned the binder around. "Because the profitable projects carry your technical reasoning. The disasters carry Grant's executive approvals. I hire patterns." I did not accept. I also did not close the binder. That evening, I went to Grant's private office with a proposed divorce agreement. He looked as if he had not changed clothes. His tie hung loose. An open bottle of bourbon sat beside a stack of lender notices. "You sold them to Sterling," he said. "Yes." He struck the desk. "My father would never have allowed this." I placed a copy of Arthur's letter in front of him. "Your father arranged it." Grant read the first paragraph, then sank into his chair. "This is fake. Marcus held the original since before Arthur died. The signature and custody record are verified. He looked toward the closed door. Paige put you up to this. She wanted you angry. Paige didn't give me the shares. You baited her about the baby. I asked a question. She says stress is dangerous for the pregnancy. Then perhaps she should stop slapping people at galas. I slid the divorce proposal across the desk. I am not claiming your mother's home, your separate inheritance, or assets that are clearly yours. You will not claim my share sale proceeds or my separate property. We disclose everything, divide the marital accounts fairly, and end this. You have hundreds of millions now and want to leave me with nothing. I am leaving you with every asset you can prove is yours. That is not nothing. The company was mine. You were president. I was the owner of the voting shares. Arthur made that distinction because you refused to. Grant stared at the agreement. What about us? You answered that at the gala. Paige is carrying my son. Then build your future with her. He looked up, and for 1 second I saw fear instead of rage. Elena, I can fix this. The company? The marriage. You held her after she hit me. His face hardened again. She was frightened. And there it is. He refused to sign until his attorney arrived and explained that Arthur's gifted shares were my separate property under Texas law. The transaction was documented, and a public challenge would expose the very records Grant had not produced to Sterling. Just after midnight, he signed. I left the Caldwell building carrying only my purse and Arthur's letter. 2 weeks later, Adrian called a special board meeting. Sterling now controlled 51% of the votes. 2 minority funds supported an independent review. The review found that Grant had concealed $96 million in contingent obligations connected to 3 expansion contracts. He had used company aircraft and expense accounts for trips with Paige. He had committed a fabrication subsidiary to guarantee a loan for a supplier owned by Paige's brother without full board approval. Adrian asked me to attend the meeting as a witness, not as a director. I agreed only after Marcus confirmed that my appearance would not create new duties after the sale. The meeting took place in the boardroom Arthur had designed on the 31st floor. His portrait still hung behind the chair Grant occupied. When I entered, Grant looked at my cream suit, then at Adrian behind me. You sold control and now you're here to watch, he said. I'm here because the audit team has questions about work I performed. Work you performed as my wife. The board secretary activated the recorder. Mr. Caldwell, please direct comments through the chair. That small correction embarrassed him more than shouting would have. The lead reviewer, a former bank examiner named Dana Reeves, began with the 3 expansion contracts. Grant had signed side letters promising minimum purchase volumes even if the projects were delayed. Those promises converted optimistic forecasts into real obligations. He had not included them in the materials shown to lenders or minority directors. We had growth targets, Grant said. Side letters are normal. Undisclosed guarantees are not, Dana replied. She displayed the supplier loan next. Paige's brother had formed Bayline Specialty Metals 4 months before receiving a $22 million credit facility. Caldwell's fabrication subsidiary guaranteed repayment. There was no competitive bid, no conflict disclosure, and no board approval in the minutes. Grant turned to his general counsel. Legal reviewed it. The general counsel shook his head. Legal reviewed a proposed supply agreement. We were not given the guarantee. Dana placed an email on the screen. Grant had written to Paige, once your brother's line is secure, we can move the contract before anyone asks who owns what. Paige had answered with a heart. I felt sick, but not surprised. The chief financial officer, Owen Price, had worked for Arthur for 18 years. He looked as if he had aged 5 of them in the previous 2 weeks. Why didn't you alert the board? Adrian asked. I did, Owen said. He produced 6 memoranda warning that Grant's commitments could breach lender covenants. Grant's office had marked 4 as resolved without explanation. The remaining 2 had never reached the audit committee because Grant removed them from the meeting packet. Owen has always been afraid of expansion, Grant said. Owen looked at him. I was afraid of employees finding locked gates on payday. The room went silent. Dana then asked me to explain a refinancing model created during Arthur's illness. I described the assumptions, reserve thresholds, and reporting controls. On the screen, my version required audit committee review before any related party guarantee above $2 million. Grant had disabled that control 7 months after Arthur's death. Why? The board chair asked him. Grant leaned forward. Because Elena built a system that made it impossible to lead. It made it harder to hide, I said. His eyes moved to me. You always wanted my chair. I owned the votes and never took it. I wanted you to deserve it. Adrian did not smile. Neither did I. This was not a victory scene. Plants in Beaumont, Corpus Christi, and Pasadena depended on the decisions made in that room. During a recess, I went to the employee cafeteria instead of the executive lounge. News of the review had spread. A maintenance supervisor named Luis Herrera approached me with 3 other employees. Are they closing Beaumont? He asked. Not if the stabilization plan works. People are saying Sterling bought us to strip the equipment. Sterling's purchase agreement requires continuation of core operations. Adrian committed that in writing. Luis studied my face. And you believe him? I verified it before I signed. The employees did not cheer. They asked about health insurance, union contracts, and next week's payroll. I answered what I knew and refused to invent certainty where none existed. When I returned upstairs, the board had received a voicemail page left for Grant the night before the gala. Make sure Elena understands she is finished. Once she is out, the shares are yours, the company is ours, and no one can question Bayline. Grant claimed Paige had misunderstood him. Did you correct her? Dana asked. He had not. The review lasted 6 hours. By the end, even the 2 directors who voted to retain Grant admitted that the undisclosed guarantees required immediate limits on his authority. The 7 directors who voted for removal cited lender deception, conflict violations, control overrides, and retaliation against employees who raised warnings. No one cited adultery. That mattered. Grant was not removed because he betrayed me. He was removed because the habits that allowed him to betray a marriage had also taught him that rules existed for weaker people. Grant called the missing disclosures temporary timing issues. The board called them cause. He was removed as president by a 7-2 vote. An interim executive took control while lenders negotiated standstill agreements. Sterling did not erase the Caldwell name or close the plants. Adrian brought in operating teams, preserved payroll, and suspended the contracts that created the greatest risk. Paige disappeared from Houston that night. Grant's mother called me before dawn. Look what you have done to Arthur's company. The plants are open. The employees were paid. My son has been humiliated. So was I. A marriage can survive an affair. Mine didn't survive the husband protecting his mistress after she struck me. Margaret began to cry. Grant has always needed strong women to forgive him. Then he should learn what happens when they stop. I ended the call. A month later, I accepted Adrian's offer to lead strategic operations at Sterling. It was not gratitude, rescue, or romance. The contract gave me authority over budgets, acquisitions, and restructuring teams. It also included a clause allowing me to leave without penalty if Adrian ever used Arthur's letter to pressure me personally. He read the clause and signed without negotiation. You expected me to object, he said. I expected you to notice. I hire patterns, remember? On my 3rd week, Grant appeared in the Sterling lobby. By then, an online business outlet had learned about his removal. Cameras waited outside because he had announced he was coming to address the theft of his family legacy. When I stepped out of the elevator, I found him kneeling on the marble floor in front of employees and reporters. "Elena," he said. "Please forgive me. Paige manipulated everything." I stopped several feet away. "Paige hit me once. You dismissed me for years. We can start over. Now that you no longer control the company?" He looked around at the cameras. "I lost my judgment. I thought the baby." My phone vibrated. Marcus had sent a message with a screenshot from a petition Paige had filed seeking prenatal support and medical expenses. Her filing included an ultrasound report and estimated conception window. The dates did not match the weeks Grant had been in Houston with her. I read the report twice. Then I turned the phone so Grant could see only the date line, not the private medical details. "Before you ask me to return," I said, "you may want to ask Paige why the pregnancy timeline does not match yours." Grant stared at the screen. The color drained from his face. Losing me had not been the end of his fall. It was only the moment the floor disappeared. The reporters shouted questions, but Grant no longer seemed to hear them. He stood, swayed once, and gripped the edge of the reception desk. "That can't be right," he said. "It may not be. Medical estimates are not paternity tests. You knew. I received the document 30 seconds ago. You planned this humiliation." The accusation would have hurt once. Now it sounded like a man describing the only language he understood. "No, Grant. I planned to go to work. You brought cameras and knelt in a lobby." Adrian had been watching from the mezzanine. He came down but stopped beside a column instead of placing himself between us. Grant saw him. "You took my company and my wife." Adrian's expression did not change. "Ms. Marquez is an employee who signed her own contract. The company was purchased from its legal owner. You are responsible for the rest of that sentence." Security asked Grant to leave. He went without another scene. 3 months later, a court-authorized paternity test confirmed that he was not the father. Paige withdrew her support claim before the scheduled hearing. Through her attorney, she admitted that the father was a married real estate developer from Dallas who had ended their relationship when she refused to remain quiet. She had begun seeing Grant soon afterward and convinced herself that his money, name, and desire for an heir could turn uncertainty into a fact. Grant released a statement blaming her for deceiving him. It did not produce the sympathy he expected. Too many people remembered that he had introduced the pregnancy at a gala by allowing Paige to attack his wife. Even if every word Paige had told him was false, his response had been his own. He tried a different version 1 week later. In a television interview, he said grief over his father, pressure from lenders, and manipulation by 2 ambitious women had caused him to lose control. He described me as a wealthy executive who had waited for a private mistake and then sold thousands of employees to a rival. The interviewer asked whether he disputed the hidden guarantees. Grant said the details were confidential. She asked whether he had seen Paige slap me. He said emotions had been high. She asked why he threatened divorce instead of calling security. He ended the interview early. Sterling's communications team wanted me to respond immediately. They drafted a statement calling Grant dishonest and unstable. I deleted both words. "Why are you protecting him?" the communications director asked. "I'm protecting us from making claims we don't need." My statement said only that the share transaction had been independently valued, that core operations remained open, and that the board's employment decision was based on documented governance failures. I would address the assault and divorce only through proper legal channels. The restraint frustrated reporters. It reassured lenders. 2 days later, Luis Herrera, the maintenance supervisor from the cafeteria, spoke at a union meeting. Someone recorded him on a phone. "I don't know rich people's marriage," he said. "I know our checks cleared because the new owner negotiated with the banks instead of pretending nothing was wrong." Judge that part with facts. The clip spread farther than Grant's interview. Paige sent me a letter through her attorney after the paternity result. It was not an apology. She said Grant had promised to divorce me, make her a corporate officer, and transfer part of his future inheritance to their child. She admitted that she sent the gala message because she wanted to force the separation before the pregnancy dates became harder to explain. She claimed she slapped me because Margaret had told her I would never leave voluntarily. I asked Marcus whether that last sentence mattered legally. Not to the share sale, he said. Possibly to the civil assault claim, if you pursue it. I had filed a police report the night of the gala and preserved photographs of my cheek. Paige's attorney offered a settlement, medical costs, a written admission, and a donation to a domestic violence program in exchange for resolving the civil claim. The criminal matter remained with prosecutors. I accepted only after the admission stated clearly that I had not provoked physical contact. Paige received probation and completed an intervention program after pleading to misdemeanor assault. Consequences did not need to destroy her life to recognize what she had done. Margaret denied encouraging the slap. I believed her. She had encouraged silence, endurance, and the idea that Paige's pregnancy mattered more than my dignity. She did not need to raise a hand to help create the room in which Paige believed she could. Paige eventually moved out of Texas. I heard that the child was born healthy and that the biological father reached a private agreement after testing. I did not follow the details. The baby had never been my enemy. I was too busy rebuilding a life I had allowed to shrink around the Caldwell name. Working for Adrian was not gentle. He was demanding, exact, and almost offensively calm when everyone else wanted drama. In my first month, I proposed suspending a plant expansion in Louisiana because projected transport savings depended on a rail agreement that had not been signed. Adrian challenged every assumption for 40 minutes. If we pause now, we lose preferred pricing, he said. If we build now and the rail agreement fails, we lose $28 million before production begins. The vendor says the agreement is certain. The vendor is not offering to guarantee it. He leaned back. What do you recommend? A 45-day delay and a price protection deposit with a refund trigger. Draft it. The next morning, I found his comments in the margin. He had not erased my name. He had not copied the proposal into a memo labeled with his initials. He had made 3 useful changes and approved it under mine. That should not have felt extraordinary. It did. We argued often. He rejected my plan to consolidate 2 engineering teams because the leadership transition risk was higher than my model showed. I proved him wrong about a maintenance acquisition whose customer concentration he had underestimated. When I was right, he said so in the room where the disagreement had occurred. When he was right, he expected the same from me. Respect became a daily action instead of a speech. 6 months after I joined Sterling, my division completed a plant expansion near Corpus Christi and recovered a municipal contract the company had lost 2 years earlier. At the celebration dinner, Adrian raised a glass. This belongs to Elena's team, he said. The board approved the capital. She built the plan and made it work. The words were simple. I had spent years pretending I did not need them. Afterward, I stood alone on the restaurant terrace looking over the water. Adrian joined me but kept several feet of distance. You looked uncomfortable during the toast, he said. I'm not used to being thanked publicly. That is not the same as disliking it. Grant used to say I hated attention. Do you? I considered the question. I hate attention for things I didn't do. I think I'm learning to accept credit for things I did. Useful distinction. You make everything sound like a board resolution. Occupational damage. I laughed. He smiled, and the moment became dangerous because it felt easy. I stepped back. Adrian, I am not ready for whatever that was. His expression remained steady. Then it was 2 colleagues enjoying a successful evening. And if I'm never ready? Then I will still have hired the right executive. He went inside before I had to answer. That restraint did more to earn my trust than any declaration could have. The divorce became final 7 months after the gala. Grant and I had no children, and the separation agreement held. His attorneys attempted to reopen the share transaction, arguing that I had acted under emotional distress. The claim failed because Marcus had documented my review before the gala, the offer had been standing, and the sale price exceeded an independent valuation. The judge approved our agreed division of marital assets. Outside the courthouse, Margaret waited beside a black sedan. "I wanted to see you," she said. "You could have called Marcus. You blocked me. After the 19th message calling me vindictive." She looked older than she had at the gala. "I was trying to keep my family together. By asking me to tolerate a public affair? By asking you not to make one night destroy a marriage?" I felt the old anger rise, but underneath it was grief. Margaret had spent most of her adult life protecting male pride and calling the work love. "It wasn't one night," I said. "The gala was simply the first time everyone else saw it." She looked away. "Arthur adored you. Arthur respected me. There is a difference. Grant is alone now. Being alone is not fatal. Never learning may be." She asked whether I would speak to him. I said no. As I turned to leave, she said, "You have become very hard." I stopped. "No. I have become difficult to use." For weeks afterward, the exchange followed me. I wondered whether strength was turning into cruelty. I wondered whether the line between boundaries and punishment could blur when you had enough money to walk away safely. Rachel Kim, a therapist Adrian's sister recommended, asked why I believed refusing access was punishment. "Because Margaret is right about one thing," I said. "Grant is alone." "Did you create his isolation?" I left. "After what?" I described the gala again, the slap, the red wine, Grant's hand in Paige's hair, his threat of divorce. Rachel waited. "If a client told you that story," she said, "would you advise her to return so the person who hurt her felt less alone?" "No." "Why are you less entitled to your own advice?" The question took months to answer honestly. Adrian never asked what I discussed in therapy. He did not send flowers to my apartment, invent business dinners, or use Arthur's letter as proof that fate had joined us. He asked for my opinion on acquisitions, sent articles he thought I would challenge, and once left a container of soup outside my office when I worked through the flu. The note said only, "This is not billable. Eat it." Our friendship developed in small, unremarkable decisions. He learned that I hated surprise parties and loved old architecture. I learned that he called his mother every Sunday and could not cook anything more complicated than eggs. He had been divorced for 8 years. His marriage ended without betrayal, both people had wanted different lives and delayed admitting it. "You don't hate her?" I asked once. "No. That seems suspiciously healthy. We had excellent lawyers." I laughed so hard I spilled coffee. 9 months after I joined Sterling, Margaret suffered a serious cardiac episode. Grant called from a hospital number because I had blocked his phone. "My mother needs valve surgery," he said. "The specialist she needs is out of network, and my accounts are tied up in the lender litigation." "Why are you calling me?" "Because you can help." The answer pulled me backward in time. For 5 years, Caldwell emergencies had become my responsibility because I could solve them. "Send the medical information to Marcus," I said. "Only what Margaret authorizes." "I'll review options." "You'll pay?" I said I'll review options. That afternoon, I canceled 2 meetings and called hospital foundations. Adrian noticed the blank space in my schedule. "What happened?" he asked. "Margaret needs surgery." He did not say she deserved her situation. He did not remind me of the gala. "Sterling's Family Foundation funds a cardiac access program with Texas Medical Center," he said. "It is independent. If she qualifies medically and financially, the foundation can cover what insurance does not. I don't want special treatment. Then she will go through the same review as everyone else. And if she doesn't qualify? You can decide what you want to do with your own money. Margaret qualified under the program's hardship provisions because Grant's assets were frozen during corporate litigation and her secondary coverage had lapsed. The foundation approved the surgery without identifying me. It was performed 6 days later. I visited once after she moved out of intensive care. She looked small beneath the white blanket. Grant says you arranged this, she whispered. A foundation reviewed the application. Why would you help me? Because refusing to be your daughter-in-law does not require me to wish you dead. Tears filled her eyes. I failed you that night. You failed me long before that night. She turned her face toward the window. I thought keeping Grant powerful would keep the family safe. Arthur knew power without discipline was the danger. He always understood our son better. I did not offer forgiveness. I also did not withdraw the chair beside her bed. We sat in silence for 10 minutes. It was the first honest thing we had done together. When I returned to the office, Adrian was reviewing a contract. The surgery went well, I said. I heard. Thank you. You made the referral. Your foundation paid. The committee approved. I did not vote. I leaned against his desk. You are extremely irritating when you're ethical. I receive that feedback regularly. You leave me very few reasons to dislike you. He looked up. I could try something else. Such as? Giving you a reason to love me. The room went still. He did not stand or move closer. That was not a demand, he said. It was an honest answer. I'm still afraid that gratitude is confusing me. Then do not answer while you are grateful. And if the answer is no? We finish the contract review at 4. You make rejection sound scheduled. It helps with planning. I smiled despite myself. Ask me again when I no longer feel rescued. You were never rescued. I know that intellectually. Then I'll wait for the rest of you to catch up. 5 more months passed. By then, Sterling had stabilized Caldwell's major subsidiaries. The board sold 1 non-core property, renegotiated 2 expansion obligations, and preserved all 3,200 jobs Arthur had wanted protected. Grant remained a minority shareholder through inherited interests, but he had no management authority. Civil claims over the undisclosed guarantees continued. Nothing depended on my personal vengeance. My relationship with Adrian changed quietly. We had dinner without discussing work. We visited a restored theater in Galveston because I had once mentioned its architecture. He met my younger sister and survived 3 hours of questions. I met his mother, who told me he had been serious since birth and needed someone willing to laugh at him. The first time he kissed me, he asked. The first time I stayed at his house, he cleared an entire drawer instead of assuming I would move into his life by degrees. The first time we fought, it was about business. I accused him of withholding information about a supplier acquisition. He proved the document had arrived late, then apologized for not updating me sooner. Neither of us threatened to leave. Neither of us used silence as punishment. We finished angry, honest, and still together. That felt more intimate than romance had ever felt with Grant. Almost a year after the slap, the Houston Industrial Council held its annual gala in the same ballroom. I considered declining the invitation. The idea of returning made my cheek ache with remembered heat. Adrian did not tell me that attending would prove strength. We can announce the national investment somewhere else, he said. Do you want to go? Yes. Then I do too. I wore a deep plum gown with clean lines, no diamonds, and my hair loose over one shoulder. When I entered, people stared. This time, I did not lower my eyes or wonder which version of my marriage they remembered. I presented our $240 million domestic manufacturing initiative from the stage. I explained the investment schedule, labor commitments, and risk controls. Reporters asked questions. Board members listened. When I finished, the audience stood. For years, I had spoken through Grant's slides from invisible rooms. Now the applause landed where the work had begun. As I stepped away from the microphone, Adrian took it. "There is another announcement," he said. I turned. "That is not in the presentation." "No. You would have cut it for being insufficiently strategic." Laughter moved through the ballroom. Adrian came down the 2 steps from the stage and stopped in front of me. He did not glance at the cameras. His eyes stayed on mine. Then he knelt. The room inhaled as one. "Elena," he said, "I do not want to rescue you, because you were already walking out when I entered the story. I want to argue budgets with you, build a home with you, and keep admiring the way you enter a room without asking permission to exist. Will you marry me?" For a moment, I saw myself 1 year earlier, gripping a wine-stained table while another woman's hand burned across my face. I saw Arthur's letter, Marcus's conference room, the Sterling contract, Margaret's hospital bed, and every ordinary day Adrian had respected an answer he did not control. I did not think of Grant. I thought of myself. I held out my hand. Yes. The applause became deafening. When Adrian placed the ring on my finger, I looked toward the back of the room and saw Grant standing beside a supplier who had brought him as a guest. He looked thinner. His eyes were wet. I felt no triumph. I felt distance. After the gala, he caught up with us near the elevators. "Elena." Adrian stopped, but I touched his arm. "Give us a minute." Grant swallowed. "I only want to say I'm sorry." "For losing the company?" "For losing you." For the first time, the words did not sound like a negotiation. "I wish you had understood my value before losing everything became the price of seeing it." "I know." "Do you?" He nodded. "My mother told me what you did for her. The program did what it exists to do. You didn't have to make the call." "No. I didn't." He looked at the ring. "Will he make you happy?" "That is not his job alone." Grant's mouth tightened, then relaxed. "You always said things I understood too late. Then listen sooner in your next life." There were no screams. No cameras caught the exchange. We did not need an audience for the first honest ending of our marriage. I returned to Adrian and left. We married 1 year later at a small coastal property near Galveston with 64 relatives and friends. There were no corporate banners and no magazine agreement. My sister officiated. Margaret sent a handwritten note wishing me peace. Grant did not attend, and I was grateful he respected that boundary. I kept the Sterling job. Marriage did not turn me into an extension of Adrian, and he did not turn my title into a favor. Our prenuptial agreement was longer than our ceremony and made both of us laugh. It preserved my independence, his assets, and the understanding that love was not ownership disguised with flowers. I also founded an organization called Harbor Step. It provided emergency legal consultations, employment training, and financial transition grants for women leaving coercive or abusive relationships. We partnered with shelters and community colleges across Harris County. At the opening, I told my story publicly without using Paige's name. "For a long time, I believed endurance was a form of love," I said. "It is not. Love does not require you to disappear so another person can look larger. Forgiveness is not the price of safety. And having the resources to leave creates an obligation to help build doors for people who do not." Afterward, a woman around 50 waited until the room was nearly empty. She had a fading bruise beneath her makeup. "I came because my daughter sent me the invitation," she said. I told myself I was only gathering information. Information is a beginning. She started to cry. "I think I'm ready to ask for help." The hug she gave me meant more than the purchase price of every share I had sold. Months later, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. Elena, I do not expect an answer. I finally understand that Paige did not destroy our marriage. I did. I am sorry. Be happy. Grant. I read it in the garden behind the house Adrian and I had chosen together. He was at the grill arguing with smoke as if it were a contract partner. I answered with one word. Thank you. Then I deleted the message. Not because I hated my past. Because I no longer needed to live inside it. Adrian walked over carrying 2 plates. Everything all right? Better than all right. We sat beneath the live oaks as the last light moved across the water. I thought about the slap. For months, I had believed it was the worst humiliation of my life. Now I knew it had also been a door. Paige tried to take my place. Grant believed he could replace me. Margaret tried to persuade me that a wife should absorb anything to preserve a powerful name. All 3 were wrong. My place had never been beside a man who required my silence to feel important. My place was anywhere I could choose, work, love, and look into a mirror without feeling that I had abandoned myself.